You know what's really annoying? When your cargo hauler decides to have a midlife crisis right in the middle of nowhere. And by nowhere, I mean the ass end of the Proxima Sector, where the only thing for light years is some fancy alien research station that probably costs more than my entire ship. Captain Maya Rodriguez. That's me, staring at a control panel that's lighting up like a Christmas tree from hell. Red lights everywhere, warning beeps that sound like dying space whales, and my hyperdrive making noises that definitely aren't in the manual. Well, crap, I muttered, because sometimes the classics work best. The research station loomed ahead like a giant metal flower someone had forgotten to water. All chrome and unnecessary curves, the kind of architecture that screamed we have way too much funding, and even less sense. My distress beacon was already pinging them, because apparently even my ship knew when to swallow its pride. The response came in that annoyingly melodic voice that all advanced aliens seem to have. Unknown vessel. This is Biological Research Station Omega-7. State your emergency. Yeah, hi there. This is Captain Rodriguez aboard the freight hauler Rusty Bucket. My hyperdrive just decided to cosplay as a paperweight, and I'm wondering if you folks might have some replacement parts lying around. A pause. Then please dock at Bay 12. Dr. Keth'var will assess your situation. The way he said situation made it sound like I had some kind of embarrassing medical condition, which, considering the state of my ship, wasn't entirely wrong. Bay 12 turned out to be spotless in that sterile way that made me want to track mud everywhere just to see someone's reaction. The docking clamps engaged with a satisfying thunk, and I made my way through the airlock to meet my hopefully helpful alien benefactor. Dr. Keth'var was about 7 feet tall, purple, and had the kind of smug expression that usually came with tenure and too many research grants. His species, the Zephyrians, were known throughout the galaxy for being absolute know-it-alls who'd spent the last 1,000 years cataloging every other species like they were collecting baseball cards. Ah, a human, he said, looking me up and down like I was something he'd found stuck to his shoe. How quaint. Quaint? I raised an eyebrow. That's a new one. Usually people go with dangerous or unpredictable, or my personal favorite, please don't eat me. Keth'var actually laughed, which sounded like wind chimes having an argument. Dangerous? My dear primitive creature, humans are among the most fragile species we've encountered. Your bone density is laughably low, your muscle efficiency is abysmal, and don't even get me started on your cardiovascular limitations. Wow. You really know how to make a girl feel special. This station studies the physical capabilities of various galactic species, he continued, clearly warming to his favorite subject. We've tested over 400 different races, and humans consistently rank in the bottom percentile for strength, speed, and endurance. I looked around the gleaming facility, noting the various alien researchers bustling about with equipment that probably cost more than most planetary defense budgets. And you've tested actual humans for this data? Well, no, Keth'var admitted. But our mathematical models are quite precise. We've extrapolated from skeletal remains, atmospheric analysis of your homeworld, and gravitational calculations. Right, math. Got it. I nodded sagely. So about those hyperdrive parts? Ah yes, your mechanical difficulties. He clasped his 4-fingered hands together. I'm afraid our parts fabricator is currently occupied with essential research equipment. However, I could expedite your repairs in exchange for a small favor. Here it comes, I thought. There's always a catch. We're currently lacking live specimens for our physical capability studies. If you would consent to some harmless tests, I could have your parts ready within the hour. I looked at this 7-foot purple academic who thought humans were basically cosmic weaklings, then at my dead hyperdrive, then back at him. Harmless tests? Completely painless. Simple strength measurements, endurance calculations, reflexive response timings. Consider it a contribution to galactic scientific knowledge. The smart play would have been to wait for another ship or try to jury-rig my hyperdrive. But something about this guy's attitude was really starting to bug me. Besides, I was curious to see what these supposedly superior aliens considered impressive. You know what, Doc? You've got yourself a deal. Keth'var's face lit up with the kind of glee usually reserved for kids on Christmas morning or researchers about to prove their pet theories. Excellent. This will be most illuminating. we'll finally have empirical data on human limitations. As he led me deeper into the station, chattering excitedly about bone density measurements and muscle fiber analysis, I couldn't help but smile. This was going to be fun. The testing facility looked like someone had crossed a gym with a medical laboratory and then decided it needed more blinking lights. Alien researchers scurried around adjusting equipment and making notes on devices that looked like they could probably calculate the meaning of life if you asked them nicely. Now then, Keth'var said, pulling up what looked like a holographic clipboard, we'll start with some basic strength measurements. Nothing too strenuous for your fragile human physiology. He gestured toward what I assumed was some kind of grip strength tester, though it looked more like a torture device designed by someone with too many PhDs and not enough common sense. Simply grasp this and squeeze as hard as you comfortably can. We don't want you injuring yourself. I picked up the device, noting how it was clearly designed for hands much larger than mine. The metal felt oddly light, probably made from some advanced alloy that was stronger than steel but weighed about as much as aluminum foil. Whenever you're ready, Keth'var said, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension usually reserved for talking to very small children or very confused tourists. I gave it what I figured was a medium squeeze, the kind of grip you'd use to open a jar of pickles that was being stubborn. The machine beeped, lights flashed, and several aliens looked at their tablets with expressions of polite disappointment. Keth'var murmured, making notes. 37 units. About what we expected for human musculature. Before I could ask what 37 units meant in the grand scheme of things, a shadow fell across the testing area. I looked up to see what could only be described as a walking mountain of muscle and bad attitude. This is Grunt, Keth'var said with obvious pride. He's our current facility champion. A Corvanian warrior who holds records in 12 different strength categories. Grunt was about 9 feet tall, built like someone had decided a gorilla needed more muscles and anger management issues. His skin was a mottled green-brown, and he had tusks that suggested his people had evolved from something that took dental hygiene very seriously. Human, Grunt rumbled in a voice like distant thunder. You look weak even for your species. Well, aren't you just a big fluffy teddy bear? I replied sweetly. Grunt picked up the same device I'd just used and squeezed. The machine didn't just beep. It practically sang an opera of impressed electronic noises. Numbers flashed across the display, and I caught a glimpse of something in the 400s before Keth'var quickly moved to the next test. Remarkable as always, Grunt, he said. Now, Captain Rodriguez, let's move on to the lifting assessment. The next station featured a bar loaded with what looked like weights, though they had that same oddly light appearance as everything else in this place. Keth'var adjusted something on his tablet, and the bar suddenly looked heavier, probably thanks to some kind of artificial gravity field. This is calibrated to approximately 50 pounds in your Earth measurements, he explained. A reasonable challenge for human capability. I looked at the bar, then at the expectant faces around me. Several more alien researchers had gathered to watch, probably hoping to see the primitive humans struggle with their sophisticated equipment. Some of them were even taking videos, which was either going to be really embarrassing or really entertaining, depending on how this played out. I bent down and picked up the bar, making sure to grunt a little and act like it was taking effort. The aliens nodded knowingly to each other, making notes about human biomechanics and structural limitations. Good, Keth'var said encouragingly. Now, if you could hold that for 10 seconds, we'll get an excellent baseline measurement. I held the bar, adding a slight tremor to my arms for dramatic effect. Around the room, aliens were whispering to each other about muscle fiber density and skeletal loading tolerances. Someone mentioned something about how humans probably couldn't even lift their own body weight, which took significant self-control not to respond to. After what I felt was an appropriate amount of fake struggling, I set the bar down with a relieved sigh. Excellent work, Keth'var said, though his tone suggested he meant adequate for a particularly weak invertebrate. Now for the endurance portion. The endurance test involved what was basically a treadmill. If treadmills were designed by aliens who had very specific ideas about how much punishment different species could handle, I stepped onto the belt and started walking at what felt like a leisurely pace. This is calibrated for optimal human cardiovascular stress, one of the other researchers explained. Most species can maintain this pace for approximately 15 minutes before exhaustion. I nodded and kept walking, occasionally throwing in a little heavy breathing for effect. Around me, the aliens watched with the kind of fascination usually reserved for nature documentaries about particularly slow-moving creatures. After exactly 14 minutes, I started slowing down and breathing harder, finally stepping off the machine with what I hoped looked like genuine fatigue. 14 minutes, 37 seconds, Keth'var announced to the gathered researchers. Slightly below our projected average, but within expected parameters for human endurance limitations. The other aliens nodded and made more notes. Someone mentioned that humans probably needed lots of rest and frequent meals to maintain even this level of activity. Another suggested that our species likely spent most of its time in sedentary pursuits, which explained our obvious physical limitations. I stood there, pretending to catch my breath while listening to a bunch of aliens discuss my species like we were some kind of particularly unimpressive zoo exhibit. The irritation was starting to build, but I reminded myself that I needed those hyperdrive parts. Well, Keth'var said, reviewing his data with obvious satisfaction, I think we have quite enough information to complete our human assessment. Thank you for your cooperation, Captain Rodriguez. Your species is indeed as disappointingly weak as our models predicted. He turned to address the other researchers. I'll be filing our report tonight. Humans can be officially classified as physically inferior, suitable perhaps for light clerical work or other non-demanding occupations. The gathered aliens chuckled at what they apparently considered a clever joke. Someone mentioned that it was probably for the best that humans were so weak, as it meant they were unlikely to pose any threat to more advanced civilizations. I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the grateful primitive who was just happy to contribute to galactic science. But inside, I was starting to look forward to the moment when these smug academics realized just how wrong their fancy mathematical models really were. So I said cheerfully, about those hyperdrive parts? You know what they say about the best-laid plans of mice and overly confident alien scientists? They tend to get interrupted by emergency alarms that sound like the universe is having a panic attack. The testing facility had just settled into that satisfied post-experiment buzz when every speaker in the place started screaming warnings in at least 6 different languages. Red lights flashed, blast doors started sealing, and suddenly every alien in the room was moving with the kind of panic usually reserved for tax audits or surprise visits from in-laws. Containment breach in Specimen Bay 7, a mechanically calm voice announced, which was somehow more terrifying than if it had been screaming. All personnel evacuate to designated safe zones immediately. This is not a drill. Keth'var went from smug to terrified faster than a politician changing positions during election season. His purple skin actually managed to get paler, which was impressive in a deeply concerning way. What's in Specimen Bay 7? I asked, though something told me I probably didn't want to know. Void render, Grunt said, and for the first time since I'd met him, the big Corvanian actually looked worried. Very bad. Very, very bad. A what now? But the aliens were already running, which in hindsight should have been my first clue that maybe I should start running too. Keth'var was practically tripping over his own feet in his hurry to reach whatever counted as a safe room in this place. Captain Rodriguez, he called back as he reached a reinforced doorway, you should come with us. Quickly. I started toward the door, but it hissed shut before I could reach it. Through the reinforced window, I could see Keth'var and the other researchers huddled around a bank of monitors, their faces illuminated by the glow of security feeds. Hey, I banged on the door. Little help here? Keth'var pressed a comm button, his voice crackling through a speaker. I'm terribly sorry, Captain, but the safety protocols won't permit the door to reopen until the threat is neutralized. But don't worry, you'll provide excellent observational data. Observational data for what? That's when I heard it. A sound like someone had taught a landslide how to growl and then given it anger management issues. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the facility, getting closer, and it definitely didn't sound like anything I wanted to meet in a well-lit room, let alone a dimly lit alien research station. The sound of tearing metal echoed through the corridors, followed by what might have been screaming if screams could bend steel. Whatever was making its way toward me was not in a good mood, and it apparently had strong opinions about things like walls and doors. What exactly is a void render? I called to the window. Keth'var was staring at his monitors with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for watching natural disasters on the news. A apex predator from the Kepler void zones. 12 feet tall, armored carapace, capable of tearing through battle cruiser hulls with its bare claws. And you keep one of these things as a pet, for research purposes. It was perfectly contained until the power fluctuation caused by your ship's docking procedure apparently compromised the holding cell's integrity. Great. So this was technically my fault. That was going to make the insurance paperwork interesting. The growling was getting closer, accompanied now by the sound of something very large and very angry making its way through the station's corridors. Emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow, and I was starting to understand why all the aliens had been so eager to reach their safe room. Captain Rodriguez. Keth'var's voice came through the comm again, and he actually had the nerve to sound excited. You're about to witness a fascinating predator-prey interaction from a unique perspective. I'm about to witness a what now? The Void Render has killed entire military squads. Corvanian shock troops, Centauri battle commandos, even a pack of Rigelian warhounds. We've never had the opportunity to observe its hunting behavior with a human subject. I stared at the window where Keth'var was now adjusting recording equipment with the enthusiasm of someone about to film the galaxy's most violent nature documentary. Did you just say I'm the human subject in this scenario? The data will be invaluable. We'll finally have empirical evidence of human survival instincts under extreme duress. The tearing metal sounds were right outside the testing facility now, and I could hear something that sounded like claws scraping against the walls. Whatever was coming my way had apparently decided that the direct route was the best route, and wasn't particularly concerned about things like structural integrity or architectural aesthetics. You know, I said conversationally to the window, where I come from, we have a saying about people who use others as bait for dangerous animals. Oh? Keth'var looked up from his recording equipment with genuine curiosity. We call them assholes. Before he could respond, the main door to the testing facility exploded inward in a shower of twisted metal and alien engineering. Through the smoke and debris, I got my first look at a Void Render. 12 feet tall was accurate. So was the part about the armored carapace, which looked like someone had crossed a lobster with a tank, and then given it a really bad attitude. It had too many arms, all of them ending in claws that could probably open cans from orbit, and a mouth full of teeth that suggested its species had never heard of vegetarianism. The thing's eyes locked onto me with the kind of focus that predators reserved for prey that was about to become lunch. It let out a roar that made the earlier growling sound like a lullaby, and every instinct I had developed over years of freight hauling in dangerous sectors told me to run. Instead, I sighed and cracked my knuckles. Through the window, I could see Keth'var adjusting his recording equipment for the best angle. Fascinating, he murmured into his comm. The human appears to be frozen by terror. This should provide excellent death footage for our archives. The Void Render took a step toward me, claws scraping against the floor, and I had to admit it was pretty intimidating. If I didn't know better, I might have actually been worried. Too bad for the Void Render that I did know better. The Void Render charged at me with all the grace and subtlety of a freight train having an identity crisis. 12 feet of armored death machine bearing down on what it clearly thought was going to be an easy snack. Its claws left gouges in the floor, its roar shook the walls, and its eyes held the kind of predatory intelligence that said it had done this dance before, and always came out on top. Through the window, I could see the alien researchers leaning forward with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for championship sporting events or particularly good explosions. Keth'var had his recording equipment focused perfectly, probably already planning the academic papers he'd write about human terror responses and predator-prey dynamics. The Void Render was about 3 feet away when I stepped forward to meet it. Now, I've been in a lot of scrapes over the years. Pirate raids, cargo hold brawls, that unfortunate incident with the Centauri customs officials that we're not supposed to talk about. But I'd never tried to catch a charging alien death machine barehanded. Turns out, it's easier than you'd think. I grabbed the Void Render by what I figured were its shoulders. Though, with all those arms, it was hard to tell exactly where shoulders ended and additional nightmare appendages began. The thing weighed maybe 150 pounds, which was actually less than the cargo crates I moved around my ship on a daily basis. For a split second, We just stood there. The void render looked confused, like it was trying to process why its unstoppable charge had been well stopped. I looked back at it with what I hoped was a reassuring expression. "Hey there, big guy," I said conversationally. "Having a rough day?" Then I picked it up and threw it across the room. The void render hit the far wall with a satisfying crash, taking out what looked like an expensive piece of monitoring equipment in the process. It slid down to the floor and sat there for a moment, making a sound somewhere between a whimper and a confused growl. Behind their reinforced window, every alien in the safe room had gone completely silent. Keth'var's tablet had slipped from his nerveless fingers. Someone's mouth was hanging open so wide I was worried they might dislocate their jaw. I walked over to where the void render was sitting and crouched down next to it. Up close, it was actually kind of cute in that ugly, dangerous animal way that made you want to scratch behind its ears, assuming you could figure out where its ears were. "You're not really that scary, are you?" I said, reaching out to pat what I thought might be its head. "Just big and loud and probably confused about being stuck in a lab all day." The void render looked up at me with what I was choosing to interpret as gratitude. It made a softer sound, almost like a purr if purrs were made by creatures that could theoretically tear through battleship hulls. I glanced back at the window where the alien researchers were still frozen in shock. "You know, folks, I think your apex predator here just needs some exercise and maybe a proper diet." "When's the last time anyone took him for a walk?" Keth'var managed to find his voice, though it came out as more of a squeak. How did you?" "No." "What, this?" I gestured at the void render, who had apparently decided I was acceptable company and was now leaning against my leg like a very large, very dangerous dog. He weighs about as much as my gym bag back home. A little lighter than I was expecting, actually. But the void render killed an entire Corvanian shock battalion. I looked down at my new friend, who was now making what could generously be called happy noises. "Did you really do that, buddy?" "That seems kind of mean." The void render tilted its head in a way that managed to look both apologetic and slightly proud. "Well," I said, standing up and brushing dust off my clothes, "I guess that explains why you were locked up. Can't go around killing people, even if they probably deserved it." Through the comm system, I could hear frantic whispering from the safe room. Someone was frantically checking calculations on their tablet. Another was reviewing what sounded like military reports. Keth'var was staring at his monitoring equipment like it had personally betrayed him. "The sensors must be malfunctioning," one of the researchers said. "There's no way a human could generate that much force. Check the artificial gravity settings." Another suggested. "Maybe the field generators are interfering with the creature's mass distribution." I walked back toward the window, the void render following behind me like a lost puppy that happened to be covered in armored plates and natural weapons. "Your sensors are working fine," I called to them. "And your gravity feels pretty normal to me. Maybe a little light, actually." "Light?" Keth'var's voice cracked. "This station maintains standard galactic gravity. 1.0 G. I bounced experimentally on my toes. "That explains why everything feels so easy around here." "What's Earth gravity compared to standard galactic?" There was a long pause while someone presumably looked it up. 2.4 G, came the whispered response. I nodded. "Yeah, that sounds about right. No wonder your strength tests seem so weird. It's like you calibrated everything for people living on the moon." The void render had settled down next to me and was now making contented rumbling noises. I scratched behind what I hoped were its ears, and it practically purred. "So," I said cheerfully, "about those hyperdrive parts?" "Because I'm thinking this little demonstration probably covers my end of our deal." Through the window, I could see alien researchers frantically recalculating everything they thought they knew about human physical capabilities. Keth'var was staring at me like I'd just announced that 2 + 2 = purple. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was already looking forward to the conversation where I explained to these smug academics exactly what kind of planet produces creatures like humans. This was definitely going to be fun. The safe room had gone from excited research hub to what looked like the aftermath of a particularly devastating final exam. Alien researchers were hunched over tablets, frantically recalculating everything they thought they knew about physics, biology, and the fundamental nature of the universe. Keth'var had managed to reopen the blast door, though he was keeping what he probably considered a safe distance from me and my new void render buddy. The fact that I was casually petting a creature that had apparently terrorized half the galaxy was clearly not computing with his worldview. "Captain Rodriguez," he said carefully, like he was addressing a particularly unstable explosive device, "would you mind explaining exactly what just happened here?" I looked down at the void render, who was now sprawled on his back getting belly rubs and making happy growling noises. "What this? I figured out why your death machine was so cranky. He's probably been cooped up in that cell for months with nothing to do but think about how much he missed running around." "No, I mean," Keth'var gestured helplessly at the destruction. "How did you lift a creature that weighs over 300 pounds? 300? I paused in my belly-rubbing duties. "Doc, this guy weighs maybe 150 tops. I've carried heavier groceries." "That's impossible. Our measurements clearly showed." "Your measurements were taken in standard galactic gravity," I interrupted, "which, as we just established, is less than half what I'm used to." One of the other researchers, a spindle creature that looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a nervous accountant, spoke up. "But even accounting for gravitational differences, your bone density and muscle structure shouldn't be capable of generating that much force." I sighed. This was going to require the full explanation, wasn't it? "Okay, gather around, class. It's time for a little lesson about where humans come from." The aliens huddled together like they were attending a lecture that might explode at any moment, which, given their current understanding of human capabilities, wasn't entirely unreasonable. "Earth," I began, "is what we call a death world. 2.4G gravity weather that can kill you in about 6 different ways. And an ecosystem that spent millions of years trying to eat everything else in the ecosystem." I scratched the void render behind his ear plates, and he made happy rumbling sounds. "See, most planets that develop intelligent life do it the easy way. Mild gravity, stable climate, maybe a few friendly herbivores to keep things interesting. Earth decided to take the hard route." Keth'var was taking notes frantically, like he was trying to document a new form of cosmic horror. "What do you mean by hard route?" "Well, let's see. We've got polar bears, which are basically living tanks that hunt for fun. Great white sharks, which are what happens when evolution decides that a mouthful of knives needs to learn how to swim really fast. Honey badgers, which are roughly the size of a house cat but could probably take on your void render here and win." The void render looked up at me with what I was choosing to interpret as insulted dignity. "No offense, buddy. You're plenty scary. It's just that honey badgers are basically concentrated evil in a fuzzy package." The alien researchers were frantically cross-referencing their databases, and from the looks on their faces they were finding some very disturbing information about Earth's fauna. "But surely these are isolated examples," the mantis creature said hopefully. "Isolated? Oh, that's cute." I laughed. "We've got venomous spiders the size of dinner plates, birds that can kick holes through steel, and plants that can kill you just by touching them. Our oceans are full of things with tentacles and bad attitudes. Our forests are packed with creatures that think humans are a tasty snack. And our deserts are basically outdoor ovens with scorpions." Runt, who had been unusually quiet during this whole exchange, spoke up. "What about human military?" "What about it? If humans are so dangerous, why have we never encountered your warriors?" Now that was a good question. Well, here's the thing. What you just saw me do? Picking up your apex predator and tossing him around like a softball. I'm not a warrior. I'm a freight hauler. I sit in a spaceship all day moving cargo from point A to point B. The silence that followed this statement was the kind of quiet usually reserved for moments when everyone realizes they've made a terrible mistake. You're not military trained?" Keth'var's voice was barely a whisper. "Nope, never even been in a fight that lasted more than 30 seconds. Most humans haven't. We don't really need to be warriors when our normal physical capabilities are apparently superhuman by galactic standards." I stood up, and the void render immediately rolled over and got to his feet as well, apparently deciding that wherever I went, he wanted to follow. "Your strength tests were designed for species that evolved on low-gravity worlds with relatively peaceful ecosystems," I continued. "Your endurance measurements assume cardiovascular systems that never had to deal with running away from saber-toothed tigers. Your reflexes benchmarks are based on creatures that never had to dodge lightning-fast predators while navigating terrain that was actively trying to kill them. The researchers were looking at their tablets like the devices had personally betrayed them. Someone muttered something about recalibrating their entire database. The thing is, I said, warming to my subject, humans aren't even the scariest things on Earth. We're just the ones that learned how to use tools and build spaceships. Everything else is still back there, evolving new and creative ways to be absolutely terrifying. Keth'var had gone from purple to a sort of pale lavender color. Are you saying that Earth is populated entirely by apex predators? Not entirely. We've got some nice herbivores too. Although even they can be pretty dangerous if you annoy them. Ever been charged by a rhinoceros? Those things weigh 2 tons and can run 30 miles an hour. I patted the Void Render's armored head. This guy would probably fit right in on Earth. Maybe not in the cities, but there's plenty of wilderness where something his size wouldn't even be remarkable. The alien researchers looked at each other with the kind of expression usually reserved for people who had just realized they'd been juggling live grenades while blindfolded. So I said cheerfully, "About those hyperdrive parts? You know what's funny about completely shattering someone's understanding of the universe? They get really motivated to help you with whatever you need. My hyperdrive parts went from we might have something in storage to here's a complete engine overhaul with premium components and a 5-year warranty, and about the time it took Keth'var to process the fact that humans were apparently the galaxy's accidental apex predators. The repair bay was a flurry of activity as alien technicians worked with the kind of desperate efficiency usually reserved for defusing bombs or preventing diplomatic incidents. Which, given what they now knew about human capabilities, might have been exactly how they were viewing the situation. The new hyperdrive core is rated for military-grade performance, the chief technician explained nervously, like he was afraid I might pick him up and throw him if the specifications weren't satisfactory. Top-of-the-line navigation systems, premium fuel cells, and a full defensive suite. Defensive suite? I raised an eyebrow. Just in case you encounter any unpleasant situations during your travels, Keth'var said quickly. He was maintaining what he probably thought was a respectful distance, though it looked more like he was afraid I might spontaneously become dangerous if he got too close. I had to admit, the new setup was impressive. My poor old rusty bucket was getting upgrades that would have cost me a decade's worth of cargo runs, that's all because a bunch of alien academics had suddenly realized they'd been dramatically underestimating human physical capabilities. I've also taken the liberty of updating your galactic travel credentials, Keth'var continued, holding out what looked like a brand new identification card. You're now classified as a diplomatic guest. I looked at the card. Where it used to say human low threat level, it now read human, species classification pending, extreme caution advised. Extreme caution? Well, we're still not entirely sure what humans are capable of, he admitted. For all we know, you've been holding back during our entire interaction. I glanced over at the Void Render, who had been following me around the station like a lost puppy ever since our encounter in the testing facility. The alien staff had initially been terrified of him, but they seemed to be adjusting to the fact that he was apparently now my pet. Speaking of which, I said, what's going to happen to him? Keth'var followed my gaze to the Void Render, who was currently investigating a maintenance cart with the kind of intense curiosity usually displayed by toddlers in toy stores. We're reconsidering our specimen acquisition policies, he said carefully. It seems our containment procedures may not have been accounting for the possibility of subjects with enhanced physical capabilities. You mean you're letting him go? Actually, we were hoping you might consider taking him with you. I looked at the Void Render, who had apparently decided that the maintenance cart was acceptable and was now looking around for other things to examine. You want me to adopt a Galaxy-class apex predator? He seems to have bonded with you, Keth'var pointed out. And frankly, we're not sure our facility can contain him if he decides he wants to leave. At least this way he'll be with someone who can handle him. The Void Render looked up at me with what I was pretty sure was hope in his multiple eyes. It occurred to me that I'd been alone on cargo runs for months at a time, and having some company might not be the worst thing in the universe. What do you eat? I asked him. He made a series of chirping sounds that were probably meant to be communicative but mostly just sounded adorable. Processed protein supplements, Keth'var translated, about 10 pounds per day. Will provide you with a year's supply. I looked at my newly upgraded ship, my extremely improved travel credentials, and my potential new companion.